Hello everyone, welcome to this video on the Temple of Palatine Apollo by Propertius, which was written in, we think, about 16 BC. So before we get started, I wanted to just address the fact that lots of scholarly opinion actually has labelled this as one of the worst poems written in Latin literature, which personally I think is a little bit unfair. It's been criticised for its lack of heart, its bad structure, and its lack of subtlety. So just bear that in mind. You can use that as a scholarly opinion if you would like. I don't know the name of the exact scholar, but as you're reading it or as I'm going through it, just see if you agree. And remember, you're also welcome to disagree. So a little bit of historical context, things to consider when we're studying Propertius. So he's a lot younger than Horace, and he hasn't grown up in the same environment as Horace or Virgil. He didn't live through the civil wars, which would have been extremely traumatic and distressing and would have certainly sculpted many people's political views. Also, the Battle of Actium was in 31 BC, and this poem is about the Battle of Actium. So it really is interesting that 15 years later, poets are still writing about it, and this shows how significant the Battle of Actium was in the Roman mindset and how it was still at the forefront of the Roman psyche. Other things to consider, which I'm sure you've already clocked that are happening at this time, is the secular games have been held in Rome the year before. We've also got the moral laws of Augustus, the Leges Iulii, which have been passed in recent years. In 20 BC, the Parthian standards were returned, and they will pop up later. But what is key is that this is the real golden age of Rome that this is being written in. There is morality, there is prosperity, there is peace, and perhaps there is a general opinion that this is all brought about by Augustus, obviously, but also by the favour of the gods and them smiling on the new Augustan regime. Okay, so we've already considered a little bit of scholarship. There is more extended scholarship on Propertius specifically, which can go down very well with examiners. Most notably, Wallace Hadrill and Tarrant, who I have here. So the first four that you have in front of you are all Wallace Hadrill. He suggests that Propertius is trying to set up a distinction between war and love in his poetry. Whenever Propertius mentions Caesar, it is in the context of war. There's actually not much love going on in this one, and maybe that's why scholars don't like it, because traditionally Propertius is a love poet. Wallace Hadrill also argues that for Propertius, you either serve in the military of war or in the standards of love. And for him, love was preferable. And we've seen this in other poetry. And if you haven't looked at one of those other poems already, then do. Chaste and Faithful Gala is a good one, which is all about love and relationships. He also says that there is little doubt that Augustus used poetry to promote a positive image of himself. The fact that the poets seem to be saying different things shows that they were not dictated to. Now, this last one is a really good general one. Please, I don't want any of you to ever talk about poets as if they're being told what to write or how to write. And something that I will always come back to is the fact that poets always reflect mood, sentiment in society. And the general positive mood that we see in the poetry suggests that the general propaganda of Augustus has worked. People are feeling positive. There are signs of subversion, though, and we should always be looking for them, just as there would have been subversion in society. Tarrant is really interesting because he suggests that Propertius was politically unsympathetic. He thinks that Propertius is perhaps more subversive than others, and as we go through the poem, perhaps look for indications of that. So here the poem starts. I would really recommend that as I go through this, you pause it and you make some notes alongside your copy. This first slide, this first section of the poem is sort of overwhelmingly positive, but does tend to hint at perhaps some violence that's coming. There's a very religious mood and a religious atmosphere here shown in the very first few words. We have priest and we have sacrifice, and then we have the reference to sound or the lack of it. Let silence aid it, and let the heifer fall struck down before my altars. So we have silence there, we have religious language, but we also have this word struck. which is violent, which is full of impact. Let Rome's wreath compete with Philetus's ivy clusters, and let the urn provide the waters of Cyrene. So this might seem a little bit confusing. This is basically poets talking poetically about other poets. So Philetus was a poet, was a Greek poet, a famous Greek poet who we know Propertius looked up to. Cyrene could be referring to where Philetus came from, or it could be referring to another great Greek poet called Callimachus that Propertius looked up to. Give me soft customary. Now this is referring to religious, not really implements, but things that were attached to religious rituals and offerings of lovely incense, and let the loop of wool go 3 times round the fire. Sprinkle me with water, and by the new altars let the ivory flute sing of Phrygian jars. So lots of really lovely language there. Soft, lovely, wool, sprinkle, water, new, ivory flute, all this lovely sensory, peaceful language. And then Propertius urges, may fraud be far from here, may injury depart for other skies, let purifying laurel smooth the priest's fresh path. So lots of really positive language. This seems like it's going to be a lovely poem at the moment, doesn't it? I think it's quite poetic so far. In this section, the mood begins to build a little bit. Propertius is still appealing to the gods of poetry, or the goddesses of poetry. So Muse and Calliope, these are nymphs, goddesses that he wants to inspire him. He says, we will speak of the Temple of Palatine Apollo. That's not going to happen for a while, actually. The subject is worthy of your favour. The song is created in Caesar's name. While Caesar's sung Jupiter, I beg you yourself to listen. So here is our first mention of Caesar. And this is Augustus Caesar, who is being talked about here. This brings the poem round to the main subject. And then here he's going to describe the location of this poem. There is a secluded harbour of Phoebus's Athamanian coast, whose bay quiets the murmur of the Ionian Sea, Actium's open water. So notice again we have peaceful, soft, gentle language used here, remembering the Julian fleet, not a route demanding of sailors' prayers. Here the world's forces are gathered. A weight of pine stood on the water, but fortune did not favour their oars alike. I feel the language becomes more ominous here. We've got fleet, we've got demanding, we've got world's forces, we've got that word gathered, this idea that something is about to happen. Weight, it's almost as if the poem is getting more weight. Pine stood on the water is reference to the boats. They are made of pine. And then we have this foreboding final few words here. Fortune did not favour their oars alike. So what Propertius is doing here is he's describing the gathering of the Egyptian fleet and of Octavian at this time's fleet. This sense of foreboding continues into the next section. So we've got the word enemy, immediately negative, and doomed. Trojan Quirinus is a reference to Romulus. So we have the presence of the gods here, the idea that the gods are against the Egyptians because we know that they're the enemy fleet. And then we have our first reference to Cleopatra, but yet she is not mentioned by name. And the shameful javelins fit for a woman's hand. So this idea of shame associated with her behaviour. This is not how women should be behaving. Think about the contrast between that and a visual source like the head of Livia, perhaps. And notice how she isn't named, and she won't be named throughout, and neither will Mark Antony. It's almost as like Mark Antony has been erased out of this story, even though we know that he is fundamental to it. There was Augustus's ship, sails filled by Jupiter's favour. standards now skillful in victory for their country. So the mention of Jupiter's favour, of course, shows that the gods are on his side. He's close to the gods. The gods favour Rome. They favour victory. And skillful in victory refers to the standards that Augustus has. So this shows that he is skillful in victory. This is showing him to be a great military leader. It focuses on that imperator theme there. Now, Nereus bent the formations in a twin arc. So Nereus is a sea god. So again, another mention of a divinity. And the water trembled, painted by the glitter of weapons. So water trembled. Even the water is afraid of what is about to happen. All of this builds the tension by personifying the water, by bringing the gods into it. We've had Nereus, Quirinus, and Jupiter all in the space of a few lines. And now we're going to get Phoebus, which stands for Phoebus Apollo, quitting Delos. So that's where Apollo was born, sort of seen as his home island. And Delos is described as anchored under his protection. The isle, uniquely floating, it suffered the south wind's anger. So we get a lovely little reference there to what it's like on Delos, the kind of environment, the kind of climate there. Stood over Augustus's stand, so this is the god Apollo, and a strange flame shone 3 times, snaking down in a bleak fire. Now that cannot have helped but remind the audience of Julius Caesar's spirit ascending to the heavens. This idea of fire and flame being an omen of something, perhaps good, perhaps bad. Phoebus did not come with his hair streaming round his neck or with the mild song of the tortoiseshell lyre, but with that aspect that gazed on Agamemnon, Pelops' son, and came out from the Dorian camp. So all of this refers to the 2 sides of Apollo. Apollo's a really interesting god. He's got lots of different aspects to him. And the key thing here is that he's either this lovely, musical, beautiful god, or he's a god that is associated with war, and in this case with Troy. And he's also linked here with how he destroyed the Python, which is a story actually that you'll look at when you study Greek religion, which was the story of how he basically killed this huge sort of snake monster, and then he was able to found Delphi, after that. Okay, so here we have this wonderful passage where Apollo is speaking directly to Augustus. I mean, what does that say about Augustus? The gods are right next to him, just like he went to build the temple, or had built the Temple of Palatine Apollo right next to his house. So this is what Apollo says: O Augustus, world deliverer, sprung from Alba Longa, acknowledged as greater than your Trojan ancestors. I mean, that's just glory, 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 isn't it? He's described as world deliverer, that links to imperator. Sprung from Alba Longa, that links to his ancient ancestors, Aeneas and Aeneas' son Iulus. Acknowledged as greater than your Trojan ancestors. I mean, that almost seems hubristic, doesn't it? Almost like he's got this legendary, mythical quality to him. And then Apollo orders him. He uses the imperative, and he's going to use a couple of these. Conquer now by sea. The land is already yours. My bow is on your side, and every arrow burdening my quiver favours you. So notice this opposition of my and you here, this idea that they are together. It is teamwork. It's all about Augustus. Another imperative follows it: free your country from fear, that relying on you as its protector weights your prow with the state's prayer. Again, this idea of weight, we saw that earlier, didn't we? Here, perhaps the weight of the responsibility that Augustus has, that word relying. Then we've got protector, this idea that Augustus is really in charge. He's got authority. He has got to win this. Unless you, defender, Romulus misread the birds flying from the Palatine, he the augur of the foundation of Rome's walls. So this again harks back to Rome's legendary history, when Romulus fought with Remus and then founded Rome afterwards, and the fight was all due to them reading the birds differently. So you may or may not know that there were these priests in Rome called augurs who would watch the birds in the sky and then decide what they should do. I know it sounds crackers, but welcome to Rome, welcome to classics. So again, it's linking Augustus with this mythical history, almost implying that the glory that Rome has was prophesied by Romulus deciding to found Rome. And they dare to come too near with their oars. Shameful that Latium's water should suffer a queen's sails while you are commander. Again, this reference to Cleopatra without naming her. This use of the word shameful, the idea that, you know, how dare she even think she can fight against Augustus? Do not fear, another imperative there, another order, that their ships are winged with 100 oars. Their fleet rides an unwilling sea. So a nice sort of historical insight there, perhaps, to how the Egyptian boats looked, you know, winged with 100 oars. That must have been quite imposing, mustn't it? But then this idea of fate, it's an unwilling sea. They're not going to favour Egypt. Obviously, it's all written in hindsight. Though their prows carry centaurs with threatening stones, you'll find they are hollow timber and painted terrors. So there is this idea, again, of the sort of fear that is portrayed by the Egyptian fleet. Centaurs are mythical monsters, aren't they? This word threatening stones are dangerous weapons. But terrors, the word says it all. But hollow and painted shows it's all just for show. There's nothing actually to fear there. The cause exalts or breaks a soldier's strength, unless it is just shame down his weapons. So again, this word shame, repetition, you know, we've had this scene with Cleopatra before. She's shameful, she's toxic. The moment has come. Commit your fleet, another order there. I declare the moment. I lead the Julian prows with laurelled hand. So the laurelled hand there could refer to victory. We know that laurel wreaths are associated with victory. Also, Apollo is closely linked with laurel. So it's got a double purpose there, that word. But again, this idea throughout this speech that Apollo is on the side of Augustus. Apollo is on the side of the Romans. Augustus is glorious. Augustus has the favour of the gods. It's all there. And here we have the final part of the battle described. So Apollo's finished speaking, and it says he lent the contents of his quiver, so the arrows, to the bow. After his bow shot, Caesar's javelin was next. So very clear image there of them fighting together. Right, Apollo, you go first. I'll go next. Rome won through Apollo's loyalty. The woman was punished, again unnamed. Broken sceptres floated on the Ionian Sea. That's a really powerful image of destruction. But Caesar, his father, marvelled and spoke from his comet released by Venus. I am a god, and this shows evidence of my race. So really interesting inclusion there. So this is Julius Caesar who is being mentioned here. There is a direct link to the divine ancestry of Augustus through Julius Caesar and then through Venus. He emphasizes the fact that he is now divine. This is Julius Caesar, I am a god. And then talks about Augustus as evidence of his race. And when he talks about that, he means his divine race. What else could you be led to believe after seeing this image of a victorious Augustus with a god fighting by his side, other than the fact that Augustus himself has got elements of divinity, if not more? And the fact that Propertius chooses to use direct speech again here makes that even more powerful. It's like we've got different actors in the play, haven't we? We've got Apollo talking, we've got Julius Caesar talking. He's very active in all its nature. Triton, another sea god, honoured all with music. Things are going to get better now. And the goddesses of the sea applauded as they circled the standards of freedom. So we've got music there, we've got goddesses, we've got applause, we've got standards, which is to do with battle, and freedom. And just that one word, freedom, almost implies that by winning this battle, Augustus has freed Rome. The woman, trusting vainly in her swift vessel headed for the Nile, seeking one thing only, not to die at another's order. So this is a reference to her suicide and the fact that she didn't want to be paraded in triumph through Rome. And also the fact that she effectively ran away, heading for the Nile, heading for Egypt. The best thing by all the gods. What sort of a triumph would one woman make in the streets where Jugurtha was once led? Now, lots of people think that Augustus would have been really hacked off that he didn't get to lead Cleopatra through Rome in triumph because she was such a legendary figure. However, Propertius is saying, well, we don't want her. She's not anywhere near as good as others like Jugurtha, who was defeated in the late 2nd century BC, who was a great African king and was then led through Rome in triumph by Marius. No, she's not as good as that. She'd have been rubbish in a triumph. So Apollo of Actium gained his temple, each of whose arrows destroyed 10 ships. So that's Apollo's arrows destroying the 10 ships. And so the implication there is that his temple was vowed by Augustus as thanks for his help in the Battle of Actium, which is no shame on Augustus's part. He had the help of a god. That means he's super. Okay, so now Propertius is going to finish off. I have sung of war enough. He's not into war, remember, according to Wallace Hadrill. Apollo the victor now demands my lyre and sheds his weapons for the dance of peace. So bad Apollo's gone, violent Apollo's gone. We're getting the good, singy, dancey Apollo, which obviously poets are going to love. Now let guests in white robes enter the gentle grove, and let lovely roses flow around my neck. May wine from Falernian wine presses be poured, and Cilician saffron 3 times bathe in my hair. Let the muse fire the mind of drunken poets. Bacchus, you are used to being an inspiration to your Apollo. So here again, lots of really positive, lovely language. We've got white, gentle, lovely, roses, flow, wine, poured. Oh, it's all there. I'm not even going to go on. But it's almost like Propertius has gone full circle, except he started off in a religious setting and now he wants to party. Let one tell of the slavery of the Sicambri of the marshes, another sing the dark-skinned kingdoms of Kephi and Mero, another record how the Parthians lately acknowledged defeat with a truce. So he's talking here about different poets singing different songs. So he refers to different people. First of all, he refers to the Sicambri, who were a Germanic tribe who had only just negotiated peace out of fear of what Augustus might do to them. He talks about Kephi and Mero, which refers to an African nation, which we know was right on the edge of the empire. And if you haven't already studied the Mero head, you will go on to look at it. That was a head of Augustus that was found buried under the steps of a temple. What Propertius is implying here is that this is an area that is ruled by the Romans, but actually the physical evidence tells us that that was not an easy rule, which is quite interesting, an interesting way to link different sources there. And then we know that the Parthians had recently negotiated the return of the standards in 20 BC, which is what that section refers to. I love the fact Propertius says acknowledged defeat, whereas I'm not sure the Parthians would have quite seen it like that. Let them return the Roman standards, for they will soon give up their own. Or if Augustus spares the eastern quivers for a while, let him leave those trophies for his grandsons to win. I mean, that's almost like a threatening message, isn't it? Saying, well, you know, there might be peace for now, but we'll come back for you, Parthians. Crassus, be glad if you know of it among the dark dunes. We shall cross the Euphrates to your grave. So Crassus lost the Parthian standards and died in the battle in Parthia in 53 BC. And it's Propertius just referencing that there. Euphrates is the river that ran through Parthia. The dark dunes refers to the underworld. So a bit of a darker tone at the end there. So I will pass the night with drinking, so with song, until daylight shines its rays into my wine. So it sounds like Propertius is going to have a very, very good night. So lots in that poem. I think poetically, actually, is really good, but what do I know? I think maybe if you were reading it in the Latin, you'd be able to spot a few more errors. But lots of really great literary features there that glorify Augustus, that glorify Apollo, that show him to be close to the gods, that link to his divine ancestry, that show him as this great imperator, but also lots about the myth of Actium and how Cleopatra's portrayed and how Antony isn't there at all. There is so much that you can talk about. So I hope that you found that useful and that you've managed to make lots of notes. Remember, you can always rewind, re-listen to slide again if you need to. Thank you and goodbye.